formative assessment, test scores go up if you use that as an indicator, but really mastery, student achievement, it all goes up. And again, I wonder, what goes unlearned because a teacher didn't get into, didn't understand, didn't apply formative assessment principles?
Give me a second to finish up your notes there, Sharon. That was affirming. What's already in place that you feel confident about? Did you guys hear? That summative can become formative.
Yes.
Yeah. Anything else affirming?
Or did you mean formative can become summative?
Sure, you go either way.
Oh, okay, because I heard summative. Okay, I just,
And that, that brings up a good point, because sort of the forgotten stepchild of assessment is pre-assessment. So when you think about pre-assessment, that could be summative. I mean, if I pre-assess you and you demonstrate to me that you've mastered this skill, I don't need to spend tons of instructional time teaching you something you already know. I can use that time for, that time can be better spent, in another way. So we have to think about that. Sometimes that formative, pre-assessment can become summative for some of these objectives that, we always talk about, particularly in language arts, there's so much to teach and so many objectives. Think about, pre-assessment. We kind of marginalize that a little bit sometimes because it can be cumbersome, but it really is a powerful tool. Any other affirmations or?
the formative feedback, or excuse me, formative assessments don't have to be long or pencil and paper, or, they can be short. And
Absolutely. We don't have to, students don't have to produce a master work to prove every single objective, prove mastery of every objective. You spend enough time in those classrooms with those kids to know what's possible. When you carefully observe, looking for specific behaviors and skills consistently over time, you capture that information anecdotally, you've assessed. So you can be confident in that, and you can carry that into a conversation with a parent. You have your records there, you have your observational data. You can be confident that you have assessed students in those ways. That's absolutely fine.
I think that, like when he said he would walk up to a teacher, I think we give feedback every 3 to 4 minutes in a classroom, individually to a group at a time. And if someone asked you, you'd be like, I don't know what I wrote on the last paper. It wasn't what you wrote, it was what you talked to the last group that you met with, and what we're going to do tomorrow after what we did today. And you just don't realize that you just gave the feedback.
I love what he said about I should be able to walk up to a teacher and say, how was your instruction informed today? How did you respond to student data? When you think about it, you do that. You can do that.
Yeah.
Now, I would be nervous if my administrator might freeze in that moment, but it wouldn't be because it hadn't happened. It was
Right.
situational. But you definitely do that on an ongoing basis. Every time you feed a child and give them a next step or guide them to a next step, that's feedback. That is feedback for that child. That child now knows, the next time I see this, I'm going to do this a little bit differently. I'm going to, do this a little bit, I'm going to change what I do. Any ahas? Anyone find anything brand new?
Well, I think we probably all knew it, but we don't have time or don't take the time to sit back and think about it, but we should spend as much time on the formative as we do the summative, and also just we talk summative in collaboration, we usually hem and haw over that, we should probably be doing not as much hemming and hawing so we can get to the formative as
Right.
well. So it does look similar in all our classrooms, so we're not seeing those huge gaps in the summative because we should have already seen it in the formative.
Absolutely. I think as we transition to standards-based grading and kind of bring our community along with us, it will become more natural for us, for those conversations to focus more on formative, or at least as much on formative as summative. We're still kind of driven by, you know, synergy, and we have to get something in there and on there and all, you know, those kinds of things. And that's the reality of our field. Those things have to happen. But I think as we become more comfortable with standards-based grading and we realize it's proximity to the objective, not a quantitative measure, you know, 85% on this thing, on this assignment. It's mastery of the objective. And it will become more natural for us. And as we talk with our parents and help them, you know, understand it will become a more natural way to do business. But that was an aha for me the first time I saw this also. Like, I don't spend a whole lot of time talking about formative assessment. I feel like I do it, but I don't spend a lot of time, you know, collaborating over what I'm going to do formatively. It just kind of happens in my lessons, you know. So that was a big aha. Anything else? Okay, how about argue? Anybody hear anything that kind of rubbed you the wrong way that you have questions about or concerns? It's okay, you know. I like what he says, so I don't.
I just wrote this down, just not necessarily, I don't disagree with it, which means I do agree with it, but he said instructional value is lost without descriptive feedback. I think that's a bold statement.
Yeah, well, I wrote
So
down,
I just wrote it down,
no feedback equals no learning impact.
right. So I just think,
Here's
I mean,
what he
as a
said,
devil's
and I know
advocate,
exactly
I
what you're
would
talking about.
argue
He
that.
said relative to when you provide feedback. So there was a caveat there. It wasn't just if there's no feedback, no one learned anything. It's just when you compare a learning cycle with feedback and a learning cycle without,
Right.
it's relatively,
Greater impact.
yeah, it's significantly less impact. So yeah, I hear you there. That makes sense. All right, actions. Anyone have something they're gonna put into place? Wanna try it?
Spend more time on informative.
I'm sorry.
Great. First up.
And carve out that time of collaboration too, like with our resource people, carve out intentional time for performance, so it gets addressed and not kind of an afterthought.
The first time I saw it, I went back and did just what he said. I circled in my plans, like where the feedback is happening. And I wasn't real happy with what I saw in terms of actually planning for places within my instruction where I was going to get feedback. So it was a pretty powerful experience to do that kind of thing. And it just happened quietly in my room by myself, so there were no witnesses.
So, does everybody understand what descriptive feedback really means? Okay,
It's
good.
coming up.
I understand.
So research suggests that there are a couple of different levels of focus as it relates to feedback. One is feedback about the task or the product, and this is a pretty impactful form of feedback. You're telling students whether it's correct or incorrect. I mean, that's important that they know that. And then you're providing suggestions for improving. And that's really specific to the product, the thing that has happened, the thing that they have created. The next level is feedback about the process. Writing is a great, a really clear example of that. I can give you feedback on the document, or I can give you feedback on how we arrived at that document. Both kinds of feedback are going to impact that student. So we need to think about that. Are we going to give feedback on the process, the product, or both? It's just something to think about. Research suggests that they are very powerful forms of feedback. The third tier is feedback about self-regulation. And this is huge as it relates to that social emotional piece. We want to encourage kids to be advocates for themselves. So a lot of times we ask all the questions. We tell them what resources they're going to need. But we want to encourage kids to advocate for themselves when they have questions, to think about where might I find the answer to that question and ask for the resource. Or I don't understand this thing, instead of waiting for my teacher to come over and realize I don't understand and explain it to me, maybe I'll start asking questions, you know, to bring myself to an understanding. So feedback about those three things, very powerful, according to research. And one is not exclusive of the other. You can provide feedback in all three areas anytime you wish. The fourth is important but not as impactful, and that's feedback about them as a person. It gets kind of dicey here. If you know any of Carol Dweck's work with mindset, this is where, and this is what traditionally, what we do traditionally. Good job. Nice work. I like that. At table 4, really doing a nice job with that. What that does is it encourages them, you know, to continue to do what they're doing, but everybody else hears, I'm not that. I'm not doing a good job. And that's not at all what we mean. So it can have an unintended consequence when we praise things in that really generic way. Feedback needs to be specific. If you're doing a good job, what are they doing a good job of? You be specific, nothing wrong with that. I like the way, you know, Table 4 has organized their resources. It doesn't mean everyone else didn't do it. It means they're an example that we can all follow. So being very specific about that feedback. So here's, I think, where Mario was going. So thinking about what feedback is. Feedback is giving students information about their next step. It's not critical. It's not hurtful. It literally is, this is good. This is a great thing that you've done. Here's how we're going to make good great. Here's how we're going to make, you know, good better. You want to think about the timing of the feedback, when you're giving it and how often, the amount of feedback, how many things are you going to focus on, and we've all had this happen. In math, you get a problem and it's, you know, there's so many things wrong with it, or in writing, we get a sample and there's so many ways we could help them improve that we end up as the editors as opposed to the teachers. So we really need to think about what's the thing that we're working on, what can I say or help them realize it's going to make them a better writer, and how much am I going to give feedback on. We also need to think about how we're giving it, whether it's orally, in writing, or maybe we're going to do a demonstration. Maybe it's going to, you know, we're going to model something, or reteach something, which goes to the audience. And we need to think about whether we're giving feedback one-on-one, to a small group, to the whole class. And that has to do with your responding to that assessment data. So that assessment data will dictate whether it's just a couple of kids I need to speak to, whether I've got a group, or whether I need to reteach a whole thing. Any questions? So then we're going to try it. I'm going to give you a writing sample from a second grader. And I'm going to give you the rubric that goes along with it. And I want you to, as a grade level, provide feedback to this student as a writer. So we're going to provide some feedback. Now the rubric has 3 tiers. So I'm going to give, you know, different tables, different things to give feedback on. Once you get it, look at the rubric.
Here's your feedback. This is your feedback, and you failed the first 3 times. You get a chance.
Can you tell us what you want us to look at?
I'm going to tell you.
Okay.
So if you look on the back of the packet, there's the rubric that goes along with it. This is actually our Virginia Beach second grade rubric. So you've got composing, written expression, and grammar usage and mechanics. So we'll just each we'll just do 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So we end up with feedback in all areas. We might not give a student feedback in all 3 areas at one time, but I want to hear a variety of feedback. So for purposes of this, we'll each take a different row of the rubric. So if you guys will count on, you'll be 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So 1s will be giving feedback related to composition, 2s written expression, and 3s grammar usage.
Grammar usage. Yeah, we have grammar usage.
Well, but it's
This is all one text.
I know.
Me too.
Can I stop you for a second? I see a couple different things going on. Just to give you a tip. When you're providing feedback, it's best to have absolute clarity about what you're going to provide feedback on. So probably the best place to start is really examining your rubric, your part of the rubric. That way when you read the student's work, you know what you're looking for. You won't get distracted by the other things that you can say.
Do you want these back?
No.
These punctuation, clarity,
It's not very
I mean, is it the whole thing? We keep going.
It makes sense, but it's
So yours is,
That's great. You're good.
okay, I use the 3 lines as well.
Well, that's cool.
Consistency, if you want to go here,
Yeah,
it could be the I just don't think that matches proper now. You see what I'm saying? I don't see that. But I don't.
quote himself.
Dot, dot, dot. All right, test.
That's the other side, isn't it? They're the same thing.
Pass it down or something?
I mean, I think that
Someone called him her dad good.
Don't forget to identify strengths as well as areas for improvement.
What about the all properties on Yep. I think it
That's not beginning of a sentence.
Oh, the computer will. So why am I supposed to give
Remember, we're not just, just looking for proficiency level, we're looking for what feedback, what can we tell the student to help improve their writing for the next grade.
So you need to end it?
did a great job. Continue to watch it. Make sure you capitalize. Other than that, you did a great job
But it's a different way of life.
Got a little bit more being
I don't think the quotation marks belong. Right.
And that's what they put on the thing outside. They can't put. So it's not the
Maybe that's not out.
It's all good. They learned about an awful lot.
When you're out there to me, it's like a little over, it's above flow. Yeah. It's above the standard.
That apple pie. Got rowdy in there.
I don't know. I don't think it's a given. It's a regular demonstration. I would say this should be
No, I just think it's
solved. We were doing errors. So I would go with B. The guy said you did a great job. Demonstrating the practice
What's wrong? Well, tell me. You know,
all right, everybody ready to share? Do we need another minute? Ready? Alright, one, you guys are gonna give feedback on composition. So what did you see as it relates to composition? The objectives were to write a variety of forms, generating ideas before writing, and then organizing to include beginning, middle, and end. And that's where I heard kind of, most of the discussion was kind of centered around that beginning, middle, and end piece. Anybody wanna share what you would ask of the student, or what you would praise, and what you would hope would be their next step?
We interpreted it as maybe the child generated ideas by drawing their picture, because that's what we often have them do. So, since we don't know they use a graphic organizer, we're assuming that maybe the picture was the starting point.
I mean, this was what you would know, so that would make sense.
Yeah. So we just rewrote, you know, like if we were doing something like stars and stairs, we just said use picture to generate ideas or to come up with ideas to help support your writing. Yeah.
And you would consider that a star?
Yes.
What would be a stair? Did you have a stair related to generating ideas, or one of the other objectives?
No, we did kind of say that they could add more detail to some of the things, but we didn't really, not on the picture, get too specific, I don't think.
Well, think about that. Beginning, middle, and end. Did they attend to that?
Oh, the beginning, middle, and end, that one. Okay, I didn't care about the picture stuff.
See, indentations not even part of this.
No, we kind of added with ours for number 2, written expression, like a clarity that a stair would be like to add some transitional words and
Yeah,
kind of make it.
That's what we said, but we couldn't add that.
Because that first sentence is kind of a catch, like really like, yeah, it kind of grabs your attention, like, oh, I want to read it, but then it doesn't flow afterward.
Middle got a little hairy.
Yeah, it's a little hairy.
Alright, well, let's stick with composition first, then we'll move into written expression. So
That's why
composition.
we started talking about the other things, and then we're like, oh, wait a minute, we gotta come back
I'm
in here.
I'm actually glad that happened, because
Right.
that is what happened, and that's why this work is so challenging.
Right.
We have to really stay focused on the thing that we've asked them to do, and that's where the feedback lives. You're not gonna continue to accept work that is, you know, chronically misspelled and poorly formatted and, you know, badly done. So we have to think about that when we give the task, and when we're moving through the task. What kind of feedback are we giving during the writing of this? Have we spoken to them about spelling during this writing, during this process piece? And if so, then we can hold them accountable at the end, you know, those kinds of things. But we have to think about that before we even roll out the task. How we're gonna formatively assess, how we're gonna provide feedback, what the focus is going to be. Did anyone else have the composing that had a stare?
Well, we had the same kind of problem with like maybe jumping too far ahead, but the one thing we said, and I think it's similar to the weakness that they found about the beginning, middle, and end, was we felt like some of that description wasn't connected in sequence to the beginning, middle, and end, because once you get to this was the best day of my life, and then after that, you're not sure if that came the sister and the wind, you don't know if it came after that, so our kid-friendly version of saying it would just be, we felt the best way to handle it would be verbal, and you would say, why did you write this here? To see, was that really what came next in the story? Because you really don't know what the sister has to do with the rest of the text.
I can tell you, being a writer does a really nice job feeding teachers the prompts, feeding us the prompts to ask in those one-on-one conversations. There's unbelievable power in that, because when you ask a kid to, you know, reflect on their own choices, then they really have to be analytical writers particularly, since we're talking about writing. They really have to be analytical. Why did I put that in? It makes sense at the time. It still makes sense to me, but maybe I need to add something else so it makes sense to my audience, you know, so it really makes them, you know, critique themselves.
My question isn't on that particular part, but mine's on the whole rubric itself, and I'll probably get beat up for this. Okay, we talk about feedback being in the child's, a language that children can understand. Why don't we have a rubric in a language that the children can understand?
Yeah, there's
Because
no way
if
it's
I'm
separate.
giving them feedback, I can say all the things I want, but it doesn't relate to any of this stuff that's here,
That is a
as
great
far as
question.
the child.
It's for the child to know what they need to do to be successful on the assignment, and if they can't understand it,
And so we give
Which
them
is
this
why we would
rubric.
never hand the child a rubric and say, here's the criteria.
no, but when you're
What
going
we're
over,
gonna incorporate into our practice is,
Break
we
it
may
down
not
into-
introduce this document at all to the students, but we can introduce these criteria to them. There's actually a video, I'll leave, do you have Leaders of Their Own Learning? I'll see if I can find one. There's a video that speaks to that specifically. And it's where you when you're modeling, you're presenting your exemplars to your students, you have them identify the hallmarks of good, since we're talking about writing, good writing in that student sample, and you document what they say makes that writing good. It's gonna be very similar to what you have in your rubric. Word choice, you know, in kid-friendly language, they're gonna say, oh, he used a lot of adjectives, or he used a lot of descriptives, whatever the kid, you know, developmentally, whatever their language is at that point. Then that rubric exists in kid-friendly language. You have buy-in because they fed you what they, it's really what they said, but not really.